Arrest her! She doesn't belong here! The cry sliced through the stillness like a shard of glass hurled against marble. Linda Carter's voice, sharp and unyielding, shattered the quiet that Silverwood Heights guarded like a crown jewel. This neighborhood was a sanctuary of symmetry: trimmed lawns, white fences without a fleck of paint out of place, mailboxes polished as if they were shrines. Yet no perfection of hedges or cobblestones could mute the ugliness that lived in the human heart. At first there was silence, an unnatural pause, as though the birds themselves had stilled their wings, startled by the violence in that single sentence. Then, as if the world were a stage and the curtain had been ripped open, came the response: sirens. They rose in the distance, low at first, then swelling into a chorus of urgency that wrapped itself around the street. Tires screeched, doors slammed, lights burst into the tranquil afternoon like a violent storm of color. Red and blue bled across the polished cars parked along the curb, danced across the brick facades of million-dollar homes, and finally fixed themselves on the smallest figure in the scene. Amelia Johnson, 7 years old, too small for the weight the moment would place upon her shoulders. She sat hunched on her red bicycle, its paint chipped, its chain slightly rusted, an odd, imperfect relic against the backdrop of manicured perfection. Her hair clung damp to her cheeks, streaked with tears. In her arms she held Bruno, the teddy bear, his brown fur worn to threads, one ear bent permanently downward as if it too had heard too many sorrows. Bruno was more than a toy. He was the last relic of a father who had kissed her forehead one spring morning and promised to return after his business trip. He never did. Bruno remained, an anchor of love in a sea of absence. Now she held him tighter than ever, rocking slightly as the sirens closed in. Her small voice cracked through the sobs, fragile yet piercing in its purity. "I want to see my mom." The words seemed to fall into a void. The officers advancing did not hear the plea of a child. They heard the echo of the call that had summoned them. Suspicious black child. Possible vandalism. Strange behavior. Words transmitted through the sterile wires of 911, yet weighted with centuries of fear and prejudice. 3 officers stepped forward, black uniforms pressed sharp, badges glinting in the fractured light. Their faces betrayed uncertainty. They were trained to assess threat, to act decisively. Yet what threat could truly be found in a girl clutching a stuffed bear? And still, the call, the uniform, the system, they pressed in. Around them, neighbors emerged, curtains twitched, screen doors creaked open. A crowd began to gather like moths to flame. They whispered, exchanged glances. Some nodded grimly, reassured by the presence of authority. Others wavered, guilt pricking their silence as they saw the child's trembling shoulders. But none stepped forward. Not yet. Linda Carter stood at the front, arms crossed, jaw tight. Her eyes burned with the certainty of the self-appointed righteous. She was 45. Divorced, hollowed by bitterness she masked as vigilance. For 2 weeks she had watched the Johnsons' house from her window, compiling suspicions as if prejudice were evidence. In her mind, Amelia was not a child but a symbol, of intrusion, of difference, of everything that did not fit the porcelain mold of Silverwood Heights. "Do your job," she hissed at the officers, her voice a venomous whisper. "Don't let her fool you." Amelia's chest heaved. She tried to speak, but the words tangled with her sobs. "I didn't. I was only looking for stones." Her tiny hands opened for a second, revealing a glimmering rock she had found beneath a mailbox, sunlight trapped in its crystal surface. Then she clutched Bruno again, as though the bear alone could protect her from the circle tightening around her. And for a moment, time seemed to hold its breath. The sirens had fallen silent, leaving only the faint hum of engines idling. The heat of the late afternoon pressed down, heavy as judgment. Every pair of eyes, officers, neighbors, accuser, locked on the small girl on the bicycle. The world had shrunk to this one fragile point. Then came the sound that broke the spell, tires screeching against asphalt. From the far end of the street, a black SUV barreled forward, sunlight flaring across its windshield like a herald. It swerved to a stop, door flying open before the engine fully died. Out stepped a woman, tall, resolute, uniform sharp with authority. Her presence was command itself, carved into every line of her stance. "Amelia!" Her voice was thunder, both fierce and tender, shaking the silence into shards. She was no stranger here. Every officer knew her face, her name, her rank. But in this moment, they saw her not only as Chief Monica Johnson, the iron-willed leader of the county police. They saw her as a mother. She crossed the distance in strides that broke through the crowd's paralysis, and in seconds, Amelia was no longer alone. Monica dropped to her knees, arms enveloping the trembling child. Bruno pressed between them. Amelia's sobs collapsed into her mother's shoulder, muffled by the steady beat of a heart that had fought too many battles to lose this one. The officers froze. Their training had not prepared them for this. The crowd held its breath, the weight of realization pressing down like a storm about to break. Linda Carter's face drained of color. Her mouth opened, but no words came. The truth stood undeniable. The child they had encircled with suspicion was the daughter of the very woman who commanded them. And in that instant, the script reversed. The accusation hung in the air, suddenly absurd, stripped bare by the light of truth. The line drawn by prejudice blurred, faltered, dissolved. For a long heartbeat, no one moved. The only sound was Amelia's quiet sobbing, her mother's hand smoothing her hair, the soft whisper, "You're safe now, baby. You're safe." But beneath that tender moment, something far larger had shifted. A neighborhood's illusion of order had cracked. The echo of Linda Carter's scream lingered, but its power was gone. In its place, another truth began to rise, one that would demand reckoning and, perhaps, healing. And so it began. The story of a shout, a teddy bear, and a child who wanted nothing more than her mother. A story that would not end with sirens, but with change. If the world had been kind, Amelia Johnson would have been invisible in the gentlest sense. Just another child riding her bicycle, humming a tune, her pockets filled with the pebbles she loved to collect. But the world, even in neighborhoods lined with white fences and flowering dogwoods, does not always know how to be kind. Amelia had lived in Silverwood Heights for only 2 months. To her, the houses seemed impossibly tall, their roofs gleaming like crowns in the sun. The neighbors' children played behind fences that felt as high as walls, their laughter spilling into the streets like water Amelia could not touch. She wanted to join them, wanted to ask their names, but words tangled on her tongue, and fear tightened her chest. Shyness was her shadow, never leaving her side. Instead, Amelia found companionship in smaller things. She collected stones, marveling at their secret sparkles, their colors hidden until held to the light. While other children traded stickers or shared dolls, Amelia's treasures were bits of quartz, polished river rocks, and sometimes the rare, glittering fragment that looked to her like a star fallen into her hand. She dreamed of being a scientist one day, though she could not have explained what kind. To her, scientist meant someone who looked at small things and found in them great truths. Her mother worked long hours, her presence swallowed by the uniform she wore. But Amelia carried those dreams silently, waiting for a time when she could show her mother a collection of discoveries that proved she was brave, too. And then, there was Bruno. The teddy bear had been soft once, his fur thick, his seams strong. Years of clutching and carrying had worn him thin, but to Amelia he was more alive now than ever. Bruno carried her secrets, whispered promises before sleep, apologies after small mistakes, hopes that trembled too much to be spoken aloud. He was, above all, her father's last gift. She remembered it clearly. He had crouched down, his tie slightly crooked, suitcase by the door. "This is Bruno," he had said, placing the bear into her arms. "He'll keep you safe when I'm gone." She had asked when he would come back, and he had smiled, brushing her hair with a hand that smelled faintly of cologne and coffee. "Soon," he promised. But soon never came. The accident stole him, and the word soon turned into never. For weeks after his funeral, Amelia had not spoken. Words were too heavy, too sharp. But Bruno had listened. Bruno had stayed. Now, as she sat in the middle of Silverwood Heights, clutching that same bear, the memories pressed against her heart like an old wound reopening, she whispered, "I want to see my mom." Not only because she needed her mother's arms, but because in that moment she longed for the kind of safety her father once promised, a safety that seemed to vanish the day he left. At school, teachers called her quiet. Some mistook it for weakness. But inside her was a mind alive with questions. Why did stones shine differently underwater? Why did the moon change its shape every night? Why did some people smile at her mother in uniform, but scowl at her when she walked alone? Questions she could not yet answer, but questions that marked her as someone who looked beyond what was given. Her new neighborhood, however, did not see questions. It saw differences. Amelia's skin, her mother's long hours, their modest car in a driveway among SUVs and polished sedans, all became fuel for whispers. Children repeated what they heard at home. And so Amelia remained outside the games, watching, wishing, sketching little diagrams in her notebook instead of joining tag or hopscotch. Bruno became more than a bear. He became her anchor. She tied ribbons around his paw to mark her experiments. She placed small stones in his lap as if he, too, could study them. And when the loneliness pressed too hard, she held him until the shadows softened. That afternoon, the afternoon when Linda Carter's scream tore the sky, Amelia had been doing something simple, something innocent, kneeling near a mailbox, magnifying glass in hand, marveling at the shimmer of a stone she had found in the grass. The glass caught the sun, bending it into prisms that danced across her wide eyes. She did not hear Linda's footsteps at first, nor see the frown hardening into accusation. She only saw the beauty in the stone, the secret light it carried. That, in essence, was Amelia. A child who saw wonder where others saw nothing at all. A child who bent toward the smallest miracles because the larger world had given her too many wounds. Yet even in her wonder, fear was never far. She flinched when doors slammed. She avoided loud voices. And when Linda snatched the stone from her hand and barked, "You don't belong here," Amelia's first instinct was not anger, but confusion. She thought she had spoken the house number wrong when asked where she lived. Her mistake seemed enormous in the face of that voice, and so the tears began, and the call was made, and Bruno once again became the shield she pressed against her heart. In Amelia's world, things were fragile, dreams, trust, even stones that crumbled when dropped. But she believed, stubbornly, that fragile things could still hold beauty. That belief was why she carried Bruno wherever she went. It was why she bent to pick up stones when others passed them by. It was why, even as the world surrounded her with suspicion, she whispered through tears, "I want to see my mom," believing that her mother's presence could restore order to chaos. Because to Amelia, her mother was not only the figure in uniform who commanded officers with a single glance. She was warmth after nightmares, the steady hand holding hers in the dark, the voice that read bedtime stories. with a patience rare in a life otherwise consumed by duty. Her mother was proof that strength and tenderness could live in the same heart, and so Amelia endured. Not because she was fearless, but because she carried within her two treasures, a bear that held the memory of love past, and a dream that pointed toward love yet to come. She was shy, she was small, but her silence was not emptiness. It was a garden, waiting. Monica Johnson had built her life upon a paradox. She was the shield for an entire county, yet she struggled each day to shield her own child from the cruelties of the world. At 38, she carried the weight of titles that most could never imagine: chief of police, commanding officer, law enforcer. In her badge was carved authority, in her uniform, stitched responsibility. Yet beneath those layers of duty, Monica was something far more fragile, far more human. A mother who kissed her daughter's forehead before sunrise and whispered, "Be brave for me," knowing she would not return until long after nightfall. She had not chosen this path lightly. Becoming the county's first black woman to wear the stars of chief was no accident. It was the culmination of years spent walking into rooms where she was underestimated, whispered about, dismissed. She remembered her early days, standing in front of rows of recruits, their eyes sliding past her, their questions doubting her. She remembered the cold glances from those who believed leadership belonged to someone else. Someone taller, someone older, someone male, someone white. But Monica did not bend. She studied harder, trained longer, worked later. She knew that to survive, she had to be sharper than their prejudice, faster than their expectations, stronger than their disbelief. And she was. Every commendation pinned to her uniform carried invisible weight. Nights of exhaustion, mornings when she left Amelia still sleeping, afternoons she swallowed guilt as she missed another school recital. For Monica, every victory in the precinct had been purchased at the cost of some absence at home. She told herself it was worth it, that the world she was fighting to reform would one day be the same world her daughter could walk through without fear. And yet, every night when she unlocked their front door and found Amelia curled in bed with Bruno clutched tight, Monica felt the ache of knowing that her daughter's first instinct for comfort was not her arms, but a bear's stitched ones. Still, she carried on. Her mornings began before dawn. Coffee brewed dark and strong, her eyes scanning case files under the kitchen's single bulb. She would pause only to slip into Amelia's room, brush back a stray curl, and whisper a blessing. Then she became chief. The badge gleamed, the voice turned steel, the gaze cut through excuses and lies. She navigated gang disputes, domestic calls, budget battles with politicians who valued numbers over lives. By night, she was strategist, diplomat, warrior. By daybreak, she returned to being only one thing: a mother, albeit a weary one. Amelia was her anchor, even in absence. Monica kept a photo of her daughter in her office, tucked just inside her desk drawer where only she could see it. It was a school picture, Amelia in a pink dress, her shy smile hesitant but pure. Whenever meetings turned hostile, whenever officers pushed back against reforms, Monica would slide the drawer open for a second. One glance at that smile, and her resolve hardened again. But resolve was not immunity. Monica feared. She feared the cruel jokes her daughter might overhear, the subtle exclusions, the weight of carrying a surname whispered with suspicion in places like Silverwood Heights. She had worked her entire career to change the culture of policing, to break the reflex of fear and prejudice. And yet, even she could not always guard her daughter from the same reflexes outside her walls. That afternoon, the one that would carve itself into her memory like stone, Monica had been in her office reviewing the new training modules on bias recognition. Her pen tapped restlessly, her mind split between two duties: the county she was sworn to protect and the child she longed to shield. When the call came across the dispatch channel, 310 Silverwood Heights, suspicious minor, possible vandalism, her heart stopped. She knew the address before the operator repeated it. She knew the voice crying suspicious before the report confirmed it. Silverwood Heights, Linda Carter, and worst of all, the name in the report, Johnson. For the first time in her career, Monica felt the line between chief and mother vanish in an instant. Her instincts did not weigh protocols. They did not calculate chains of command. They did not pause to measure optics or politics. She was a mother, and her daughter was in danger not from criminals, but from the system she herself commanded. She did not wait for her driver. She did not call for backup. She tore from the station, engines screaming down familiar streets. Every red light blurred into insignificance. Every second felt like a fracture of eternity. Images flooded her mind. Amelia's tears, Bruno's bent ear, the fragility of her daughter's small voice, trying to explain to strangers who refused to listen. And beneath it all burned a rage Monica rarely allowed herself to feel. Rage that her child, her innocent 7-year-old, could be cast as suspect in a neighborhood that praised its lawns more than its humanity. Rage that years of reform, speeches, and training modules could not erase the reflex of fear that turned a child with a teddy bear into a perceived threat. By the time her SUV screeched into Silverwood Heights, Monica was no longer chief in the way her officers knew her. She was something far greater, far more primal, a mother storming into the line of fire. And when she stepped out, when she saw her daughter trembling within the circle of suspicion, every badge, every title, every sacrifice collapsed into a single cry, "Amelia!" For 2 weeks before that afternoon, Linda Carter had lived behind her curtains like a sentry at war. Her eyes tracked the Johnsons' small house the way hawks track prey, patient, silent, waiting for the moment when suspicion might transform into proof. She was 45, but time had not been merciful. Divorce had carved years into her face long before they were due. The house she once filled with laughter now echoed with nothing but the hum of appliances and the hollow tick of clocks. Nights were long, mornings tasteless. She told herself she was strong, independent, the unofficial guardian of Silverwood Heights. But in truth, she was lonely, bitter, and restless. A woman who needed enemies to justify her emptiness. Through the window, she watched Monica Johnson leave each morning in uniform, badge gleaming, stride purposeful. Something in that image unsettled her. Authority wrapped around someone she had long convinced herself did not fit here. Linda told herself it wasn't prejudice, it was vigilance. "This neighborhood has standards," she whispered into the quiet. But deep down, even she knew, standards were just another word for the walls she had built around her fears. And then there was the child, Amelia. Linda had seen her wander near mailboxes, stoop to pick up stones, talk to her teddy bear as though it were alive. To Linda, already steeped in suspicion, this was strangeness, danger even. Odd behavior, she muttered to herself, scribbling notes on a pad by the window like a detective in her own story. She twisted Amelia's shyness into evidence, her solitude into menace. She mistook innocence for intrusion because it was easier than confronting the truth. That Amelia reminded her of her own daughter, estranged and distant after years of Linda's sharp words and colder silences. Linda's bitterness grew roots. Day after day, she built her case out of shadows. The Johnsons' modest car parked among polished SUVs, Monica's late returns, Amelia's quiet presence on sidewalks where Linda imagined only perfection belonged. She anointed herself block captain, though no one had elected her, and fed her sense of purpose with every imagined slight. On the day of reckoning, Linda did not stumble into anger. She had prepared for it. She watched Amelia kneel by a mailbox, magnifying glass in hand, studying a stone that shimmered under the sun. To Linda, the sight confirmed everything she already believed. She flung open her door, each step heavy with the righteousness of someone who has mistaken their bitterness for duty. "What are you doing here?" she barked, her hand snatching the stone away. Amelia froze, startled, her lips fumbling the wrong house number. A child's mistake. But Linda's ears heard only confirmation of foreignness, of not belonging. "You don't belong here," Linda spat, her voice rising with years of frustration not truly aimed at the child before her, but at the emptiness of her own life. In that moment, Amelia became the vessel into which Linda poured every disappointment, every failed relationship, every restless night staring at a ceiling too silent. The call to 911 was almost ritual. Her words came sharp, rehearsed. Suspicious black child, possible vandalism, unstable behavior. She layered fear into each syllable, dressing it as fact. The dispatcher's pause, the intake of breath, barely registered. Linda hung up with the grim satisfaction of someone who believed they had restored order to a world slipping from their grasp. And yet, as the sirens approached, a flicker of unease passed through her. She pressed it down. She told herself she was protecting the neighborhood. She told herself she was right. But deep within, behind the fortress of self-righteousness, a quieter voice whispered something else. What if she's just a child? What if you are wrong? Linda silenced the voice as she had silenced so many before it. She crossed her arms, planted herself at the front of the crowd, and waited for the world to affirm her fears. What she did not yet know was that the world, for once, would not side with her. That the scream she hurled across Silverwood Heights would return to her as an echo of shame. That the window through which she had spied on her neighbors would soon reflect her own face, stripped of certainty, laid bare for what it was. Loneliness twisted into cruelty. And as the black SUV came into view at the end of the street, Linda Carter felt for the first time in years something colder than bitterness, dread. The sun leaned low, tilting its golden crown across Silverwood Heights. It was the kind of afternoon meant for stillness. Garden hoses curled like sleeping serpents, the scent of cut grass drifting faint in the air, the hush of a neighborhood wrapped in its own perfection. Yet fate, like a restless wind, was already stirring. Amelia knelt at the edge of the Carter mailbox, magnifying glass in hand. To her, the world was not fences or clipped hedges, but the shimmer hidden in the smallest things. The stone she had found moments earlier seemed to hum with its own secret light, clear at the edges, fractured inside, a prism trapped in Earth's disguise. She turned it gently, watching the sun scatter through it, 100 tiny rainbows bursting across her gaze. "Look, Bruno," she whispered, holding the bear close. "It's like the stars came down to visit." She was so lost in the wonder that she did not notice the footsteps, until the shadow fell across her. "What do you think you're doing?" The voice cracked like a whip. Amelia startled, the magnifying glass slipping, clattering against the curb. She looked up into the face of Linda Carter, her brows knotted into a frown so tight it seemed carved from stone. I was just..." Amelia stammered, clutching Bruno tighter. Her small voice tried to summon courage. "Just looking at a rock. It's pretty." Linda's eyes narrowed. Her hand darted out, snatching the stone from Amelia's palm. "This isn't yours. You don't belong here." The words struck harder than the grab. They carried with them every unspoken judgment, every whispered rumor Amelia had felt but not understood since moving into the neighborhood. Tears pricked her eyes. In her panic, when Linda demanded her house number, Amelia's tongue twisted. She blurted the wrong digits. To Linda, it was confirmation. To Amelia, it was terror. The bear in her arms muffled her sobs as she whispered, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean—" But Linda was no longer listening. With a sharp pivot, she marched back to her porch, lips pressed tight with self-righteous certainty. She dialed, her voice suddenly cool, rehearsed. "This is Silverwood Heights. There's a child, suspicious, dark-skinned, loitering, possibly vandalizing mailboxes, acting unstable." Amelia heard none of this, but she felt the shift in the air when the first siren wailed in the distance. Her chest tightened, her knees drew to her chest. She rocked on her bicycle seat. Bruno clutched so hard his seams ached. "Mommy," she whispered into the bear's stitched ear, "please come soon." And thus the quiet afternoon was broken. One child's wonder had been twisted into suspicion. One woman's bitterness had found its stage. The stone that Amelia saw as treasure had become, in Linda's hands, evidence. And from that fragile misunderstanding the storm gathered, sirens rushing closer with every beat of the child's trembling heart. The telephone rang inside the dispatch center, one of 100 calls that pulsed through the wires each day. To the operators, voices often blurred together, panic from car accidents, whispers from domestic fights, clipped tones from break-ins. But this voice was different. "This is Silverwood Heights," Linda Carter said, her tone clipped, steady, rehearsed. "There's a child, suspicious, dark-skinned, loitering near mailboxes, acting unstable, possible vandalism." The words came in clean, clinical syllables, but beneath them lurked venom. At her desk, dispatcher Maria Sanchez froze. She had heard fear before. She had heard lies. But this call carried both, layered with the strange confidence of someone who believed they were doing good while dragging innocence through the mud. Maria typed as training demanded, logging each phrase: suspicious child, possible vandalism. The keystrokes felt heavier than usual, as though every letter carried its own burden of injustice. "Can you confirm the address?" she asked, her voice calm, professional. 310 Silverwood Heights, Linda answered swiftly. "That's where she is, right in front of the box. I've been watching her. She doesn't live here. I know everyone here. She's not one of us." The last words hung in the air longer than the rest. Not one of us. Maria's fingers hovered above the keyboard. The address flickered on her screen like a flare in the night. 310 Silverwood Heights. Her chest tightened. She knew that address. Everyone in the department did. It was the home of Chief Monica Johnson. For a heartbeat, Maria considered her options. She could flag the call, stall, demand more information, but the system was relentless, automatic. Protocol demanded dispatch. Already, lights on her panel blinked green to red, signaling that patrol cars had been assigned. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. "Units en route," she said into her headset, though her heart whispered another plea. "God, don't let this be what it sounds like." Across town, radios crackled to life. Officers behind the wheel gripped steering columns tighter, engines roared awake. Sirens rose from silence to scream. The machinery of suspicion had been set into motion, and no one yet knew the innocence at its center. Back in the neighborhood, Amelia wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, rocking on the bicycle seat, Bruno pressed to her chest. The world around her had shifted. Shadows of neighbors gathered, their eyes sharp with doubt. She felt the ground tilt, as though the stone she'd found was no longer treasure, but curse. Maria, in the dispatch center, sat frozen for a long moment after the line went dead. On her screen, the log blinked, waiting for her next action. Her fingers trembled. She whispered to herself, too quiet for anyone to hear. "That's the chief's daughter." But by then the cars were already rushing, the sirens already wailing, and fate was already writing its next line in fire. The first patrol car slowed to a crawl, siren dropping into silence, its lights still spinning like restless eyes. Then came the second, then the third, 3 black and white guardians of order now transformed into instruments of fear. Their arrival sent a ripple through Silverwood Heights. Curtains twitched, doors cracked open, feet shuffled toward the street, and at the center of it all sat Amelia Johnson. She had not moved from her bicycle. The frame beneath her felt too large now, the pedals too far, the world itself towering above her. She clutched Bruno so tightly his fabric seemed to sigh under the pressure. Her tears had slowed, but her breath came in sharp gasps, the kind a child takes when the world suddenly feels too heavy to stand beneath. The officers stepped out, boots striking the pavement in rhythm. Their eyes swept the scene, not yet seeing a child, but a report. Suspicious minor, possible vandalism, unstable behavior. Protocol shadowed their judgment like an iron hand. One officer, younger than the others, hesitated first. He saw the teddy bear, the trembling lips, the knees pulled tight to a chest too small to harm anyone. But the call still rang in his ears, as though Linda Carter herself whispered behind him, "She doesn't belong here." "Stay where you are," another officer ordered, voice firm but not unkind. The words, though meant as procedure, struck Amelia like thunder. She flinched, eyes wide, whispering again and again, "I'm not bad. I just wanted a stone. I'm not bad." Her words wove into sobs, yet no one reached for her hand. The neighbors pressed closer. Some folded their arms, nodding along, convinced order was being maintained. Others bit their lips, shame already seeping into their bones, but still they stayed silent. Fear of speaking out, fear of Linda's scorn, fear of breaking the facade of harmony, held their tongues captive. Linda herself stood at the front of the crowd, chin high, arms crossed, eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of vindication. This was her moment, proof that her vigilance mattered. "See?" she muttered to no one in particular. "They know. She doesn't belong." But beneath her words, a current began to shift. Mrs. Chen, standing near the edge, frowned as she noticed the magnifying glass lying by the curb, sunlight still scattering through its cracked lens. Mr. Rodriguez, arms crossed, shook his head slowly, uneasy at the sight of a child's sobs being treated like threat. Doubt whispered at the edges of the crowd, faint but growing. Still, the officers advanced, hands hovering near belts heavy with authority, their formation closing like a ring. Amelia's bicycle wobbled beneath her as she curled tighter. Bruno's bent ear pressed against her cheek like a shield. The air thickened. Every second seemed stretched, every breath an echo. A decision was about to be made, whether innocence would be recognized or erased, whether the neighborhood would see a child or a suspect. And in that fragile moment, Amelia's voice cut through again, high and broken, trembling with both fear and longing. "I want my mom." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of every child who has ever wanted safety, every voice too small to be heard above sirens. They hung in the air, trembling, demanding an answer. What the officers did not yet know was that the answer was already racing toward them, carried in the roar of an approaching engine and the pounding heart of a mother who would not let her child stand alone. The street had fallen into a hush that was almost unbearable. 3 police officers stood in a half-circle, their shadows long against the fading light, their hands uncertain near their belts. Amelia sat in the middle, her bicycle wobbling beneath her small frame, Bruno pressed so tightly to her chest it was as though she believed she could vanish inside him. The crowd leaned forward, a chorus of watching eyes, every gaze a judgment, every silence a verdict. And then, from the end of the street, came the roar of an engine. It was not the mechanical scream of sirens, but something deeper, raw. The desperate surge of a mother's will made metal and speed. A black SUV tore into view, its tires screaming protest as it skidded to a halt, the acrid scent of rubber cutting through the summer air. The driver's door flew open before the car had fully stopped. A woman stepped out. Her boots struck the pavement with the weight of authority, yet her eyes were fixed on only one thing, the trembling figure of her daughter. In her uniform, she was Chief Monica Johnson, the most powerful officer in the county. But in that instant, she was nothing more, nothing less than a mother. "Amelia!" Her voice was thunder, splitting the stillness. The officers froze, as if the earth itself had shifted beneath them. The crowd gasped, mouths opening, silence collapsing into whispers. And Linda Carter, who had stood tall and righteous only seconds before, felt her certainty fracture like thin glass beneath a stone. Monica's stride was unstoppable, cutting through the line of uniforms as though they were paper. She dropped to her knees before her daughter, arms outstretched. Amelia collapsed into them, her sobs muffled in the fabric of her mother's uniform. Bruno was crushed between them, his bent ear pressed against Monica's shoulder. For a moment, time stopped. The officers looked at one another, their radios crackling uselessly at their sides. The crowd, once eager for spectacle, now stood dumbstruck, as though the truth had revealed itself too quickly for them to process. Monica rose, holding Amelia close, her chin lifted, eyes blazing. "This is my daughter," she said, her voice clear, unshakable. "My child. The one you've surrounded because of a lie." Her gaze cut across the officers, across Linda, across every neighbor who had chosen silence. Authority rang in her tone, but so did fury and grief and the rawest love. No one spoke. Even Linda, pale and trembling now, could find no words. The weight of the moment pressed too heavy. The narrative she had spun, the suspicion she had planted, had collapsed in an instant beneath the undeniable truth of a mother and child bound together in the open. It was more than reversal. It was revelation. The question was no longer who belonged here, but who had dared to believe a child did not. And as Monica held Amelia tighter, the neighborhood, its fences, its lawns, its illusions of harmony, felt, for the first time, the tremor of its own shame. The silence that followed Monica's declaration was heavy, almost suffocating. It pressed down on Silverwood Heights, demanding reckoning. Amelia clung to her mother's chest, her small sobs fading into hiccups, Bruno wedged firmly between them. Monica's hand rested protectively on her daughter's back, but her eyes, those fierce, unyielding eyes, swept across the crowd. "Who called this in?" she asked, her voice low but sharp enough to cut glass. Linda Carter's lips parted, but no sound came. The same certainty that had propelled her to dial 911 only minutes earlier had now curdled into dread. Her eyes darted from the officers to the neighbors, as though someone else might step forward to absorb the weight of her choice. No one did. It was Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman who lived 2 doors down, who broke the silence first. She stepped forward, her voice trembling but clear. "Chief Johnson, I saw the little one. She wasn't causing harm. She was just looking at a stone. She even showed it to her bear, like it was treasure." Her words carried no accusation, only quiet sorrow. Mr. Rodriguez, the retired mailman, followed. His voice was rough but steady. "She wasn't a threat. I've seen that girl every afternoon, quiet as can be. Today she was kneeling by the curb, nothing more. This wasn't right." A ripple of unease spread through the crowd. Some averted their eyes, others shifted uncomfortably, shame pricking their silence. The neat fences and perfect lawns seemed smaller now, flimsy against the truth unraveling before them. Monica turned to the officers, her daughter still in her arms. Her words rang out like a verdict. "When you arrived, what did you see? A child with a teddy bear, tears, fear. And yet you hesitated, not because of what was before your eyes, but because of what someone told you to believe." Her voice rose, not in anger, but in something sharper, disappointment. When did suspicion become stronger than sight? When did fear outweigh the innocence of a child? The younger officer's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. His gaze dropped to the asphalt, shame written plainly across his face. Another shifted his stance, lips pressed into a thin line, as if wishing the earth would swallow him whole. Linda tried again to speak, her voice brittle. I was only looking out for the neighborhood." Monica's eyes turned to her, steel meeting fragility. "Looking out? You looked through my daughter and saw only your prejudice. You saw a teddy bear as a weapon, a magnifying glass as danger, a child as a threat. That isn't vigilance, Mrs. Carter. That is blindness." The words struck harder than any siren. Linda's shoulders sagged, her face pale, her certainty shattered beyond repair. The crowd murmured, the whispers no longer complicit but condemning. Mrs. Chen reached for Amelia's hand gently, placing in her palm a small paper-wrapped bundle. "It's a magnifying glass," she said softly. "For your collection, little one. This neighborhood has things worth finding, if we choose to see them." Amelia blinked, her tears slowing, her small fingers tightening around the gift. For the first time that day, a faint, fragile smile flickered across her lips. And in that moment, Silverwood Heights, its order, its pride, its illusions, was forced to face itself. The truth had been spoken. The lie had been exposed. The child had been seen. The crowd still lingered in stunned silence long after Monica's words had cut through the air. The sirens were gone now, their echoes fading into memory, but the weight of what had happened refused to lift. Silverwood Heights stood revealed, not as the flawless neighborhood it claimed to be, but as a mirror of the fears and prejudices it had tried to hide behind hedges and white fences. Monica carried Amelia home that night, one arm holding her daughter, the other cradling Bruno against the small chest that rose and fell with exhausted relief. Inside the quiet house, Amelia whispered only once before drifting into sleep. "Mommy, I was so scared." Monica kissed her forehead and answered the only way she knew. "You'll never be alone, not while I breathe." But Monica also knew a promise whispered in a bedroom was not enough. Something larger had to change. Days later, she stood at the podium in the county hall, her uniform pressed, her voice unwavering. Behind her were the officers who had encircled her child, in front of her, a community still reeling. She spoke not as a mother alone, but as chief of police. "This county cannot claim safety," she said, "if safety belongs only to some. We cannot call ourselves protectors if a child holding a teddy bear is seen first as a suspect. From this day forward, every officer under my command will undergo training, not only in procedure, but in perception. We will confront our own shadows because the cost of ignoring them is too high." The hall was silent, but this time it was not the silence of complicity. It was the silence of listening. In Silverwood Heights, change came slowly, awkwardly, but it came. Neighbors who had turned away began to turn toward. Mr. Rodriguez offered to walk with Amelia to the park, telling her stories of the stones he once sorted in mailboxes long ago. Mrs. Chen arrived one morning with a small box wrapped in paper. Inside was a new magnifying glass, its lens clear, its handle sturdy. "For finding treasures," she said with a smile. And treasures Amelia did find. A week later, on a Saturday morning, children gathered in the community park for what Monica called Discovery Day. Instead of whispers of suspicion, there were shouts of laughter. Instead of a child alone on her bicycle, there were clusters of children bending to the grass, holding up stones that gleamed in the sun. Amelia sat among them, Bruno on her lap, her new magnifying glass gleaming in her hand. She lifted a stone to her eye, its fractured edges scattering light across her face. For the first time in Silverwood Heights, the light was not twisted into suspicion, but shared as wonder. Linda Carter stood at her window watching. She did not join them, not yet. But even in her silence, the sound of children's laughter carried through her walls, echoing against her loneliness. Perhaps in time, even she would hear it as invitation instead of judgment. For now the change was small, fragile, like a stone discovered in the grass. But small things, Amelia knew, could hold hidden light. And so, from a shout of exclusion, came a lesson that would ripple through fences and families alike. That belonging is not a gift granted by fear, but a truth carried in every child's smile. Bruno rested quietly on her lap, his stitched ear bent as always. Only this time, the bear was not clutched in terror but sitting in sunlight, a companion to joy. Amelia's laughter rose into the sky, clear and free. Silverwood Heights would never sound the same again. Thank you for watching until the end. If this story touched you, please support by subscribing and sharing with others.